Hello everyone, this is David from Automotive Press. I'm always really excited to be here to share with you some interesting and cool stories about the auto industry, especially from Japan because as many of you guys know, I'm born and raised in Japan. I grew up there, but studied in North America, and I have access to interesting and cool things about Japan that perhaps no one else does on the YouTube world. Today, I want to show you and walk you through some really cool Japanese magazines that I have access to because I have a Japanese address and a Japanese credit card. But unfortunately, if you don't have those things, you can't see these magazines online. So let me show you, first of all, the Best Car magazine, which is perhaps the most important and a significant magazine in terms of the Japanese news because they seems to be one step ahead of other magazines in terms of news leak. And that was very obvious from the Land Cruiser leak that they showed some rendering more than 6 months ago, and it turned out to be really accurate. So they must have had some access to interesting inside scoops from suppliers or somewhere else. And so Best Car magazine turned out to be pretty good at news information. But unfortunately, unless you have access to their original Japanese version of the magazine, you don't get the full story here in North America. So I do have access to the full magazine. So let me walk you through the magazine right now. And then if there's a particular part of the magazine that you want to know more about, then please comment below and I'll expand on those sections in the future videos. So let me go through that right now. So here's a newest edition of the Best Car magazine, which is dated for June 10th. It comes out a month before, so this version just came out a couple of days ago. And Best Car magazine, again, I think is the best source of news these days. There used to be another magazine called the Magazine X, which is still around, but somehow the Best Car magazine have really overtaken everyone else for the latest and the greatest information about Japanese news leak. So let me walk you through some of the interesting news. I've already talked about the Celica last time in my videos. I won't go through this now. A quick summary was that it appears that Toyota is indeed developing a new Celica, but it's in the form of a new electric vehicle or EV. And it may even use a new hydrogen, a compressed hydrogen as a fuel source as well if it's not going to be a full electric car. But either way, they claim that the development is already happening, and in 3 to 5 years' time, we may indeed see a new Celica come out. So that's a really fascinating, interesting news. And they continue to talk about how Toyota President Akio Toyoda, who I've met 10, 12 times, I believe, has been talking about the future of Toyota quite a bit. In fact, he released a new video as part of the chairman for the Japanese automotive industry, and he talked about how carbon neutrality, or to become carbon neutral, you don't have to have everything to do with EV, that you can obtain that goal by other sources such as hydrogen fuel or E-fuel approach. So those are some interesting news from Toyota, and this is the potential Celica rendering. But there's more. So this is now next year's new Prius. It may not be a full new ground up car. It could be more of a facelift. That's what they're saying, because they're going to continue to use the same 1.8 liter hybrid system. So it's exact same system with some improvements for next year. And they're claiming, at least in the short term, in addition to maybe a plug-in hybrid, that's what we're going to get with the new Prius. They are quite confident that this design and the rendering is very accurate. So I would believe them because once again, they were really accurate with the Land Cruiser rendering, almost scary because the photograph and their rendering that they showed almost 6 months ago turned out to be really close to each other. So this is in fact how the new Prius will look like. There's no surprise that the design is following very much a similar look and feel as the new Mirai fuel cell car that Toyota introduced not too long ago. Everything else will be updated. Of course, the interior, the infotainment system, all that stuff will be all upgraded as well. But otherwise, they're saying that the powertrain and the basic system and the chassis and the components will remain reasonably close to what they already have. And so this is a new Prius, and it should come out sometime next year. Over to the next page, there is talk about the new BZ series of electric cars, which stands for Beyond Zero. There has been plenty of information about the BZ already from a variety of different sources these days. But as you know, Toyota is pushing a lot on this BZ series of cars and trucks and SUVs. And so they're just pointing out here that in addition to what they already show, which is the BZ4X SUV, they are going to introduce Model 3 type sedan, and as well as a minivan, and maybe even a little tiny kind of fun car minivan on the bottom right, much in the same theme as the old Scion brand. So those are some potential BZ series models, because there are many coming over the next few years. Over to the left side, here on this side, we are talking about a new SUV that was shown in China as part of their auto show program. And surprisingly, this is the new Toyota Crown SUV. In fact, it's actually specifically called the Toyota Crown Cougar. And it turned out to be nothing more than a rebadged version of our Highlander. So this was a huge surprise, because the Crown SUV has been rumored for some time now, and this is for Japanese domestic market, not for North American market. But no one suspected that they will simply take the North American based Crown and rebadge it, and obviously there's some changes inside and out, but and then one, two, three, and then remarket this as a Crown SUV. Interestingly enough, this is the XSE version of the Highlander, the slightly sportier version, and that's what they chose as a base for this SUV. So that's interesting news. We won't get this one, obviously, but it doesn't matter because we already have the Highlander. And then they move away from the news here. This is typically the case with Best Car magazine. The first 10 pages or so is all about news, and then they move into more regular stories about comparison and car reviews. So here they're talking about a variety of different hot hatches from around the world, and they're doing a comparison. When the Japanese reviewers do comparison like this, they do it way more detailed than what you would see in the North American YouTube or media, because they do such a great job. And so if you're interested, let me know. Perhaps I can do some sharing here in future videos. But they're including obviously cars that are not sold in North America. So if I just keep on walking through here, they've got in addition to the GR Yaris, which is of course the most interesting hot hatch that we have, but they also have M135 by BMW as a comparison, as well as a Fiat, and there's also a Suzuki Swift Sport, which is a really cool car actually. And I used to also work for Suzuki years ago. And this is becoming one of the more interesting cars, but obviously we don't get this anymore. Suzuki doesn't even sell cars in North America anymore. So they do a comparison. I'm not going to go through this in detail. They give a full spec for each of these cars here, and then they compare the GR Yaris to M135, to Suzuki Swift Sport, to Fiat 595, to Peugeot 208 GT. So that's a comparison report here, and they go into even more details by each car, and it's pretty interesting. And then they go and talk about some other past hot hatches that used to be important, and as well as some cool international hot hatches. So they talk about the old Civic Type R from 1997 to some really fascinating cool cars from Renault. And then they talk about non-performance hot hatches like the old Civic three-door hatchback we used to have in 1984, and that kind of stuff. So they talk about these stories. More hot hatches. Now they go into other North American-based hot hatches like and European ones, such as the Ford Focus and so forth. So I'm not going to go through this all in detail here. They're talking about some current model as well, including the Mercedes AMG, as well as the Civic Type R. Not about the new Type R, but the present Type R. And more opinions and stories about hot hatches. So again, they go into more details here. And then now they talk about the 86 and BRZ or BRZ, depending on which country you live in. But this is not about the new one. They're actually comparing the old one and saying, hey, the current 86 and BRZ are still pretty good. And they go into more details about what exactly changed for the new BRZ and new 86. And then, but they talk about the old one too, saying that's still a pretty decent cars. And they talk about how they evolved to the new version here. More and more opinions and information about current 86 and BRZ, and as well as some customization work that's often the case with these two cars. And they talk more about opinions. Again, more and more information, so much information in these magazines. And then they talk about the Shanghai Auto Show. So this is not all that new anymore. Lots of information on this out there. So I won't go through this. But of course, at the Shanghai Auto Show, Nissan showed some really interesting production cars. And Honda showed off the new Vezo and the electric version of that Vezo as well as Mazda and Mitsubishi also showing some cool cars there. And then they go and talk about the new advanced drive technology that was also announced by Toyota for the new Lexus LS500H and the Toyota Mirai, which is the autonomous hands-free driving. It's the first time Toyota is offering this level of autonomous technology. So they actually give you a full driver's report, not based on some press event or press information, but their own experience driving these two exact cars. So that's kind of neat too. And they talk about how the experience was. From there, funny thing about Japanese car magazines that it becomes black and white kind of halfway through. I suppose it's to save some money, and then when they go into the black and white section, it's more of a normal articles, and all the juicy stuff is in the beginning in full color. So I won't go through all of this, but just to give you a glance through this magazine so you get a feel for it. They talk about experience of owning these two for a year. So this is the Toyota Harrier, which is our Toyota Venza, and then the Nissan Kicks, which we also have. And just they're talking about two people that have experience with this for a year and see what they really liked or did not like. And then they go through in full detail here and more detail and comments about other cars as well, kind of owner's report and more owners reports here. So this just keeps going for a while. There's some cool cars that we don't see here, like the Toyota Rise, which is like a baby Yaris crossover, but it's quite different from the Yaris crossover, but it's looks similar in somewhat, and that's kind of cool car too. So and then they go into these are messages from the leaders from Nissan, Mazda, Mitsubishi, and Suzuki, their commentary about the industry. And so this becomes a little bit more of like a newspaper magazine article type thing here. No more rumors and stuff, just more serious industry news. And so there's a speech or statement by each of the executives here. And then they go into discussion about electric vehicle in terms of what's the best way to live with EVs. And yeah, so it just keeps on going here. So definitely stories getting less and less interesting. But they talk about now parking ranking, how cars are parked. There's some weird stories about how the car seems to barely fit. And so it's kind of cute and funky photos of crazy ways that Japanese park their cars. And it's just, hopefully I can take you to Japan sometime next year. If you do go there with me, I'll show you some tiny parking spots. Can't quite figure out how they could possibly fit these cars. Yeah, so that's pretty well. Now this talks about summer tires. They do comparison of the different tires. And again, they do a really good job of the comparison. And then they talk about a person who has a lot of experience about tires. Yeah, so let's I think I'll stop around here because there's more stories, and now it gets into nothing to do with sometime cars. They talk about lifestyle components and so forth. So I'll just kind of give you a glance. There's some animation here, and they gave you a story about the old Toyota Sprinter Truno, which is the old AE86. And that's actually a car that I owned way back in those days. And so they talk about some old story with mixed in with the comic or anime in here, and old Mazda RX-7. So it's a lot of information here, and it doesn't quite stop. And then toward the end, they go into color mode again. I don't know. Again, this is typically the case with all Japanese car magazines. You start off with the color, then you move into white, black and white, and then you end up with a color again. And this is usually the lifestyle section. So they're talking about camping and using the car as a way to get away from the city, and the type of food you can cook. And so they give you a full step 1 to 7 how to start the fire. And so very practical things. Japanese magazines are very hands-on and practical, so which is always quite fascinating, because you're not just reading the magazine to read about cars, but you're also learning about other stuff about life. So they even give you a recipe for how to make this a beef steak, and also a Japanese style shish kebab, which is called yakitori in Japanese. They're showing they don't eat lamb that much, but in this case, they're showing how to make that with a lamb meat. And yeah, more recipe and more Japanese dishes, and then they finish off with other station wagon stories. Yeah, so this continues on for a while. More station wagon stories, motorsports, finishing off the motorsports stories, and some further opinions. And then finally, at the very end, they give you the price guide of all the different cars sold in Japan, and then a little bit more color again, and then talk about some now international, non-Japanese scoop photos, which I think most of us have seen these ones. So there's nothing super new here. And then it finishes off with the Alltech, which is an aftermarket supplier of car parts and interesting, cool add-ons for cars. So they talk about that a little bit, give example of older Japanese JDM cars and their Alltech version, or the versions that involve Alltech as an aftermarket performance parts when these cars were modified back in those days. So there's more. It's surprising how much information is packed into this magazine. Now there's also a section called a supercar section, which is a section that talks about the owners who actually own these cars. And there's a Lamborghini Countach talk here. And again, this is back in full color. And a little bit more on the Porsche 992 also toward the end. So this is now a high-end sports car, a BMW M4 Coupe. And then there's a celebrity that seems to really like a Suzuki Jimny, another cute, cool, and funky car that we can't buy here. It's a tiny SUV, and apparently this particular celebrity just loves this small, tiny Suzuki Jimny. So that's pretty well it. I think I better finish off here, because I will never be able to go through the entire magazine. It'll take forever. It's showing another artist who's got a pink Nissan car. And it keeps on going. I can't believe this. Even I can't believe this is long. Here we go. Finally, we're done. And so this is the entire June magazine of the Best Car magazine, the Japanese version, the full version. And hopefully you enjoy that. Let me know what else you want to know about these articles, and I will update you guys every month as these magazines come on board, along with other Japanese magazines that I have access to. That's also pretty fascinating too. So that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and talk to you very soon. I'm signing off for now.